Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the special live stream for the Restitutor Orbis channel on Wednesday. And we are here to discuss Terra Infinita, the most insane map of the world, and why it may be true. Now, before we actually deep dive into this, I wanted to do the background on Terra Infinita. It is a concept, a map, and I use the word lore here. The reason being is that because officially this is a work of fiction from an individual known as Claudio. He has a YouTube channel, goes by Nos Confuden, which actually means they confuse us or we are confused. Wonderful name. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I do not know Claudio. I have not watched any of the YouTube. I have heard of the concept, and I'm familiar with the maps of Terra Infinita. And for some reason, there's a reason why all of these maps really resonate deeply with us in the, how shall we say, alternative research segment of society, if we can actually say we have a segment of society. I guess it just depends what day of the week it is, doesn't it? But if you're interested, by all means, look up the channel, Nos Confunded, and look up some of the works. I know one of the primary books that he's written, The Navigator Who Crossed the Ice Walls, and there's a lot of other lore and technically fictional work, and he'll even admit that, yes, he encourages you to do your own research, and that it is just a work of fiction. But we're really going to deep dive into this idea and the maps, really the world building that he's done for the background of this work of fiction. And to give full credit where credit's due, I think the imagination that's shown in this, the inspiration and the connection, and there are a lot of connections that we're going to explore with the research that we do. Now, ultimately, I will say it's up to you to decide what to believe and what to accept when it comes to looking into these maps and the reality of what this world may be depicting. It could be fantasy, it could be reality, it could be something in between. I'm not going to tell you exactly what the answer is. I'll give you some inclinations, some theories, and then we'll point out the exact connections to everything that we've looked at so far. And believe it or not, there are no shortage of connections in all this. So that's the name right there. Channel name is at the end, and I'll update the link on the live stream for anybody who still actually reads video descriptions. Anyways, so Terra Infinita. And what we're looking at here is one of the baseline maps, and we start with the known lands. Now, we'll look at the background and the inspiration behind a lot of this, but I will give credit where credit's due. There's clearly a lot of imagination that was put into this, and also going through the difficulty, the challenge of highlighting and connecting all this. Now, granted, this is the older map, just so you know. There's been a more recent version. We'll take a brief look at that, but out of respect to Claudio's works, we're not going to deep dive into that too much. We'll just take a brief cursory look at it. But what you see here is a layout, a two-dimensional layout. Now, before everyone gets up in arms about, oh, are we on a spinny ball? Are we on a flat land? Are we on a disc? Remember, we keep our options open. At least I prefer to, because I've never been in a position where I've been firmly convinced one way or the other. I certainly invite alternative perspectives, and I've seen evidence of both. Although, to be honest with you, I've seen evidence of something else entirely, and I will remind you of what that is when we get later into this exploration. But what you're looking at here is the known lands. We have our continents, and we even have what's represented as our sun. And the known lands in this fantasy world are surrounded by ice walls. And because the ice walls surround the known lands, it does give us the impression that there are lands beyond the ice walls. And that's really the premise behind this fantasy world that Claudio has devised and written about in these books. And that's what these maps depict. I mean, really, if you think about this, this is lore building 101. I mean, if you're going to start a fantasy series, then this is how you do it. Now, granted, with all the fantasy explorations that we've done, we've talked about this vast amount of knowledge and how these writers may or may not have this information available. Is it something that exists in the subconscious of our mind that some people can tap into? Maybe. Did Robert E. Howard have some kind of divine inspiration or some sort of connection? Did J.R.R. Tolkien have access to older works? Could this particular individual have access to other maps and has just decided to use it in some sort of fictional world? Or is there a lot more reality behind it? That's what makes it very interesting. But I think the most compelling element behind it is right here, where we see that there are lands that are displayed beyond the bounds of what we think of as the ice walls. Now, of course, you'll have everybody out there that'll telling you, yes, the ice walls have been definitively disproven. It doesn't exist, that we are indeed on a sphere, an obloid sphere, or whatever we're calling it today. Fine, so be it. But again, in this fantasy world, it is a compelling idea because whatever you believe, whether you think that we're on a spinny ball or we're on a flatland or something else entirely, a giant disc that's on the back of elephants and a giant turtle, and you're certainly welcome to your beliefs, and I do find that one very interesting too. Discworld reference there. Jamie, if you're here, you might remember that one. But the interesting concept of new lands, of connections, and of things that are a little bit strange, that don't make a lot of sense. Oh yeah, there you go, KC933. Thank you. Oblate spheroid. Yes. Obloid, oblate, whatever terminology that we're going with. So, and I think Lev says it very well right here. Nobody knows. And that's probably the truth at the end of the day. Nobody does really know. We just have different degrees of confidence in what we think that we know. So, anyways, but I think that's the most compelling element behind Terra Infinita. And that's why it is so popular and why it resonates in the minds of so many people, because it is a way, it is a depiction, a display of how there could be lands beyond the known lands. And what do we have here? Well, we have the Ancestral Republic. We have the ancient lands of Anik. We have the moving lands of Toth. And so those names, the overlap of names, I think that's just very brilliantly done in this. And if he did a lot of research and looked all this up and that's how he did this, or he really had some kind of image that just jumped in his mind. And we'll talk about some of the possible inspirations later, but it's all compelling in what it's even called. The Mermaids' Lands, the Island of Death. And there are legends that back up the existence of mermaids, such as the legend of the Silkie out of Ireland. Asgard, oh, I don't know where I've heard of that before. But then let's talk about the concept of how we would actually access these lands. And the way it's displayed here, there are portals. Now, are these physical passageways through this ice wall? Or are these something else? Well, you can certainly read the books and look at Claudio's description of it. I have many different theories for what portals could really be, and if they do in fact really exist. Now, I do personally believe that there are other lands out there. Can I say for a fact that it exists like this? Not sure. I don't know. But what I can say is there does seem to be a lot of evidence that there are other lands. It's just how do we access them? And maybe for a lot of people, it's just easiest to think we jump into a rocket and we get blasted off there. And eventually when, the space program gets back off the ground again, or, is able to stay off the ground and actually send missions to other planets, then maybe that's how we go to other worlds. I'm not discounting that. It's just, it's been quite a long time since we've actually done that. And so maybe there's another way that it happens. And yet maybe that's why we have all those connections in science fiction. I like this here, the Neptunian Ocean. Some of these names are very inspired. I think there was this other one. Oh, Ocean of Poseidon, Argos, Atos, Talos. Oh, is that where you come across the Talosians? We're actually going to look at somebody who looks like a Talosian. Hades Bridge. And you see this outer ring of mountains. So it's not just ice walls that he has in this fictional world. It's also an outer ring of mountains. So are you really going back to the crater Earth concept or something like that? What's really interesting about this two-dimensional depiction is that it really does allow us to see everything in one single image. And whether it's real, whether it's fiction, whether it has some elements of reality, that's the most compelling thing about it overall, I would say, and why we find it so incredibly interesting. I've discovered they are consensual rings and outer layers with multiple domes. And anything is on the table right now, so by all means, throw out the theories. Oh, someone wanted to make a Zardoz reference. Yes, actually, Zardoz does reference this, interesting enough. The John Boorman film, starring Sean Connery, of all people. That Sean Connery, he really showed up in a lot of, how shall we say, interesting films. And if you haven't seen Zardoz, and if you're looking for a mind trip, watch it. And another film that a lot of us forget is Wrong is Right from the early 1980s. KC933 refers to the seven firmaments. Yes, there are many different ways to look at it. And I think that's why this works so incredibly well, because in this one map, we have all of these ideas, all these possibilities, and for us, in the research that we do, all of these theories represented. Now, to take a little bit of a closer look here in some of the detail, you can see, and just to show you, So you've got the lands that we're familiar with, and really what's most compelling about it is you see the possibility of how small the continents that we live and operate on are compared to potentially other land masses, such as the Anunnaki land. Yes, he's connected a lot of things within his story and what he's told in his fictional world. What I find very interesting is just the sheer amount of references. There's also the detailing and the coloring that you see. Is it possible that the actual color of the waters changes when you go to different areas? Is it just reflecting the light that's available? And what's the nature behind these different suns? I mean, so many different things that are very interesting, so many places that you can go with it. Oh, check this out. Bird Strait right here. How fitting. So indicating possibly that there was a connection with good old Richard Evelyn Byrd, Admiral Sort, and his explorations and why he was talking about land. Now remember, it's just a fictional story, but there are a lot of wonderful connections that we see. And is it possible that these lands do exist in some way, shape, or form? Now, way back in the day before I was making content and I was a thinker and a watcher, see what I did there? Back when I was just watching content, I remember, I think it was Howdy Mikowski covered this a little bit. And one of the things that he talked about is the possibility of accessing these lands in different ways. So are these lands not necessarily in the same physical reality, but are they in a different physical reality? Connected possibly by a nexus of frequencies or different realities, parallel realities. I mean, not, maybe I shouldn't use that term, not parallel realities, but connected in ways that we can't quite perceive. That it's possible that, as the name suggests, Terra Infinita, or infinite Earth, it's one of the ways that I think Spanish is actually a little bit more, dare I say, proficient than English. I know. But anyways, when you talk about the infinite Earth and the infinite possibilities, I think that's why it's also very, very compelling and why this has such a strong emotional connection to a lot of us. But remember, we have to be careful not to allow those emotions to rule our objective observations. Although we're going to talk about how reliable are our objective observations and why it's important that we also, conversely, jump beyond them. Now, when you look at this, you see things like the Sea of Horus and Aria, area, whatever it's actually referring to. You'll also see that as we look at some of the other elements of it, there are many other lands. Now, are these representing domes? Are these representing craters? Like we have the Anunnaki's lands, we have the land of Mars. Is that actually, and you see that's what we were looking at. This is blown out. So you can see how extensive this really is. This goes on and on and on. And it's in the title, Infinite. So you have the possibility of infinite lands. Now, I know one of the issues that was taken with it was, well, okay, here we are seeing ourselves at the center of the world again. Well, I don't see it that way. For me, yes, wherever you are, the concept of solipsism, you're going to see yourself at the center of whatever the grand existence is. So it does actually make sense if you're telling the story from that perspective that, yes, where we are is the center of all these potential lands. But what you have here is a completely different perspective of how to look at other lands and what they may be representing. Now, do these represent craters? Do they represent domes? Thoughts on that possibility? The teardrops Earth. Yes, that's a good one. And Michael, many of the so-called planets have lands in this map. Yes, they absolutely do. Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Venus, a couple that appear. Yeah, that's right, Ubu. Pluto's still getting no respect. Well, ever since they downgraded it from a planet to a planetoid, I remember when that went down. I think one of those hangs from the neck of a cat, doesn't it? I am Kairos. Are we the worst off dome? You know what? Who knows for sure? I think one way to really go off on that one, though, is it's safe to say that there may be places that could potentially have it much better, and there are places that could potentially have it much worse. And we're actually going to talk about that because looking at this exploration and these different possibilities of other lands, whether you want to think of them as other craters with entire worlds. So, for example, Anunnaki's lands, is this a giant crater, or is it some kind of incredibly large dome? Or does it not even exist in the same physical reality? Is this portal, and I think that's the genius in this, calling these portals, because it opens the possibility that the actual method of connecting to these lands is something that's beyond a physical reality. Maybe you have to manifest something. Maybe there was some old gigantic machine that we had elements of on every single continent that enabled an activation of some sort of travel means that really transmitted individuals to these other lands. Or who knows? Here's the theory. I'll just lean ahead and give it to you. Is it possible that the great civilization that we once saw on our land actually originated somewhere else? Maybe in one of these other lands, maybe in the land of the custodians, or maybe something else entirely. And remember, this is his fictional work, but I do find it quite intriguing that it's a wonderful way to look at all these possibilities. It's also a wonderful way to see how all of these lands could potentially be connected, or how they could coexist, even if they don't physically coexist, if that makes sense. And if you've been with the channel for a while, you know that we look in many different perspectives and different angles. We are the center Earth and we were mined. Yeah, that's definitely a theory I've seen a lot of, that it's crater Earth, so on and so forth. QCZ, our land is beautiful and full of potential, only our politics are real bad. There's definitely a lot of beautiful land. And believe it or not, I do believe there are a lot of wonderful people. There are a lot of wonderful individuals. That just tend to be, how shall we say, lost in the grand sweeping of things. But there's many different ways to look at it. So, I am Kairos. High-speed tunnel or under-firmament high-speed airships on rails to connect? Possibility. Or maybe the distance, if this is a physical reality that we're looking at, is so insurmountable there has to be some other way. So maybe you are looking at some form of teleportation. If you remember our little tale that we looked at of our Spanish soldier in the Philippines who suddenly found himself in Mexico instantaneous. Suddenly, you realize that that kind of travel would be needed if you have this extent of lands. You know, what really is the distance of 200,000 miles? How long would it take me to travel 1,000,000 miles overland or 10 million miles? You know, and that's the beauty about this. He doesn't actually have boundaries. There's still unknown lands on the very boundaries of this. So, yeah, just ask a Sasquatch. There you go, villain. Good one. So that's really the background and looking at the different representations of this. And, you know, there's other names for it. You know, the Ancestral Republic. You know, is it possible that that's a connection, that was a stepping stone, if you will, for where another civilization actually entered our lands and then left their mark in the past, if we're going off that theory? You know, I mean, here you have it here, the Ocean of Tartars. Does that really mean anything, or are they just names? I mean, you know, I mean, we associate so much importance to names and always look for the connections, and there may be connections there, but maybe not. Maybe there really aren't connections. Maybe the important thing is there is a civilization, a people, human beings that came from somewhere else and left their mark in some way, shape, or form. Maybe we're their descendants, and it's a completely different story. There's so many possibilities. And I guarantee you that's exactly why this story and these maps have such a profound effect on all of us. And they have been around much longer than we realize, and we'll look at those. Now, you'll see here some of the other ones, you know, the lands of Quater, the lands of custodians, lands of Jupiter, lands of angels. Very, very intriguing. Aldebaran. Ooh, great song there from Enya, if you haven't heard it. Lands of Saturn. And so all of these different possibilities. And are we looking at a physical reality, or are we just looking at the way things may be connected? And I know I've gone over that concept a few times, but I think that's probably the most interesting portion of it to me, is how we may be interrelated. You know, and you look at I Am Kairos, if it is possible that these lands are physically connected, then how would we access them? For example, let's just say that our lands or our realm, our little dome or crater, however you want to say it, our marked area, how long would it take us if we wanted to go to the lands of Neptune? Would it be a physical travel point? Would we take an airship? Is there some faster airship we could take? Is there some sort of underground travel apparatus we could use? Or is that just completely beyond feasibility? Because maybe the lands of Neptune are not even physically connected to our lands. This little map just happens to show how they can coexist, but there's another means to actually access them. And perhaps that's why it's just the realm of fantasy. If there is a reality to it, then it's so unlikely it's a technology from the distant past that's been lost that there is no way to actually reach these lands. And when we think about all of our explorations, we can see all of these possibilities really play out right in front of our very eyes. And I think that's why this individual, why Claudio, deserves a lot of respect for coming up with all this. And furthermore, taking all the effort to really plot all of this out. Now, oh yeah, Lemuria is on there too. Don't you worry. Yeah, the concept of teleportation, Leo. I think that would be one of the main explaining factors for how we would really do this. So, ooh, quantum entangled portals. Yes. The whole concept of, do you have portals that actually operate in what we think of as space and time? Is time real, or is it just a concept that's in our mind? So many different possibilities. And here is the more updated map from Claudio, version 7.1. And he's definitely put a lot more of a graphic representation into this. And, if you're interested in this, I certainly recommend that you look this up and look at what he's actually published and consider some of the ideas. Yes, officially they are fiction, and he'll tell you that. But, this concept of there being a great dome and the way that he sees it. And I certainly don't want to close the book on any sorts of possibilities because we really don't know. I've certainly never been in any position to see exactly what our land looks like. Highest I've been 60,000 feet. And granted, I didn't actually see the altimeter. That's what the pilot told me after the fact. So I couldn't even confirm for you I was actually at 60,000 feet. And no, I didn't really see anything of interest outside of the plane when it happened. But that's just me. Maybe some of you have been at a higher altitude for whatever reason. Maybe there are things to see out there that you can't. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Now, some of the other interesting things that we'll dive in on here is the concept of things such as the lands of Jupiter. And yes, we're well aware that officially we have a planet or a planetoid or whatever we want to call it, a gas giant called Jupiter. It is the largest planet in our solar system. What's really interesting here is you have the land of Zeus, and then you have some of these other lands around it that Europa, one of the moons of Jupiter, famously featured in the 2000 series by Arthur C. Clarke, and very, very intriguing. Now, are these suns? Is this an ocean? Is this lava? Is this something else entirely? So many incredible possibilities with this, and all just displayed on this map. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So imagine being in a land of 5 suns. Now, why do I bring that up? How many science fiction franchises, and for that matter, fantasy intellectual properties, as we call them now, I never preferred that term, but I'll just say stories, that we have where there are multiple suns in the sky. I can think of the Dark Crystal where they have the grand conjunction with the 3 suns, but there are many, many others, least of which being Star Wars with the twin suns on Tatooine. But just think, what if there was the lands of Tatooine? Then suddenly you realize that the possibilities behind this incredible map that Claudio's plotted out knows no bounds, ideologically and beyond that. We have a way of really showing all the possibilities on this incredible map. And the gates of Underworld, where are they? That's a good one, Jose. I'm sure that that's a possibility as well. And so it goes back to that question I am Kairos asked, what's the actual nature of these lands? Are they better or are they worse than the situation that we have here? Could they represent so many other things? RB, the governments have studied astral projection and remote viewing. Why? Great question. And they have. And those are very well documented studies. And it's not very difficult to find the text and the observations on those studies. And why would they bother putting so much effort into that? Certainly a great question. Try to get a stronghold. Well, yeah, that's all possible. But there could be other people, other interests. Where are these watchers from that we discussed? Or are they someone who actually watch all the lands, such as the lands of custodians? Some of these names always interested me. Saint Germain lands. Ah, yes. Fraternity. Machiavelli lands or Machiavelli Islands. Yeah, you could say Machiavelli is still present here in our land today, such as Vic Mackey, right? All right. Bad example there. And then just looking at the original, this is the older version that he had. And what I like about this is it has the unknown zone on it. So there's still possibility for much, much more. And I think that's what's important to remember because we have an unfortunate habit now of limiting ourselves in many ways. We think we know the answer and we stop searching. And maybe if you want to think that you know the answer and you want to stop searching, that's completely fine. A lot of people say it's just to go from one rabbit hole to the other. Well, then what's the alternative? Just accept what you're told and just go along with what someone else wants you to do. I mean, that's your alternative, and have at it if that's what you really want. Nibiru, how intriguing. And so, is it just a grand coincidence, or is this a real way to see a possibility for how the lands, how the entire world, or the infinite earth, however you want to say it, really exists? And I think that's one of the most ingenious and creative elements about this whole Terra Infinita concept, the map, the stories. And if you want to explore the stories and if you want to explore the map in more detail, look at the works of Nos Confunden Claudio. By all means, go ahead and do so. Now, full disclosure, I did know a guy named Claudio. He ran a wonderful Brazilian joint not too far from where I taught, and it was pretty good food. And I'm typically not a fan of cuisine like that. It was really good, though. So, anyways, just some ideas and just some concepts overall that we can really look at. So, now let's go beyond looking at the initial maps. We'll come back to them and we're going to look at what may have inspired them. But I want to move this over to thinking about thinking. Yes, that's something I like to do. I like to think about how we think or how we see. And the concept of, is seeing reality or is it believing? In other words, if you see something, do you believe it? Is there a reason to question what we see? And of course, I'm just talking about with our eyes as they are. So if you give me one moment here, we'll bring up those images. And what is that really all about with seeing, being, believing? Well, I've got a little test for you. And you know how I like to think about the concepts of artificial intelligence and image generation and all that other wonderful stuff. And so here's the test. I want you to tell me, looking at this image, is this a real image or is this a computer-generated image, or AI, as it were? Take a look at it and let me know. Yes, I'm actually operating a test here. What do you think? Nah, it's not that kind of pop quiz, I'm Kairos. I'm just asking if you think this is real or if this is a generated image. It looks AI. You got one real there. A lot of people are saying AI. It's CGI. And most of you do think that. Michael, it's authentic. I'll be. Popsicle Stick Mini. Oh, that's a good one. I'll have to remember that one. Yeah, tube. Good one. First thought was real. Robert, I do not believe what I see, but sometimes seeing is believing, but gotta say this is real. All right. Well, I'll give you the answer on this one. And, appreciate you all honestly sharing. So you were not looking at a building. You were looking at a picture of a building. But you were looking at a picture of what is a real building in Russia. The largest building made entirely of wood. This does really exist. But are we actually looking at it? No, we're looking at an image of it. And of course, I selected the image that seemed to be the most, how shall we say, questionable. So the structure does really exist, but are we looking at an accurate representation of it? That's always a question we need to ask. Because anything you look at on that computer screen, your computer screen, my computer screen, your phone, your tablet, whatever you're watching on, it's projected into dimensions. Unless somebody out there has a three-dimensional projector, just like in that movie Paycheck, if anybody remembers that movie, where they had the ability to project 3D images. Or, we've got our Star Wars holographic generator. Yeah, which is science fiction, but, glad you're enjoying it. Well, and that's just it, Kathy, because everything is very sneaky. In the very element of questioning everything, how sure are we, is the real action to get us to question ourselves, because that's why we want to think about things. Michael, decent movie. I agree, Michael. It was a very decent action movie. And, it had Paul Giamatti in it. Oh, and I guess Uma Thurman was in it too. But anyway, moving on. Now, there was a little episode of The Simpsons. It was a early episode of The Simpsons where Homer walks into the nuclear power plant and he's wearing a pink shirt. And of course, Mr. Burns catches him because he's got his cameras watching everyone at every point in time. And he says, wait a minute, go back, zoom in. Aha! Well, judging by his outlandish attire, Smithers, I think he's some sort of free-thinking anarchist. And those are the exact words that he uses, a free-thinking anarchist. Now, of course, if you've seen the episode, you know all that happened was all of Homer's white shirts got washed with Bart's lucky red cap, and Homer ended up with a pink shirt. And, of course, Mr. Burns calls him out on it, has him brought in and questioned. And I like the choice of wording, though. Free-thinking anarchist. Mr. Burns is actually given an idea of what a lot of people, and I'm not even going to say institutions here, but a lot of people think for anyone or anything that's different or think differently. They're some sort of free-thinking anarchist, and they're not to be tolerated. Wonderful little reference there from The Simpsons. Now, everywhere you go across the land, even when you look with your own eyes and not a picture, so just remember you're looking at a picture of something, there might be some interesting discrepancies with what you see with your eyes. And we're going to talk about one of the most notorious ones here in a little bit. Hey, Ann, good to see you. No problem. Thanks for joining us. So, KC933, I'm such a nonconformist. I'm not going to conform to you guys. Well, and I think that's really what it's all about, though. I mean, everyone will criticize you for being a free-thinking anarchist, but, you know, it's okay when they do it. It's not okay when you do it. There are some people that actually think that way. So, yes, interesting terrain here, beyond any shadow of a doubt. But I'm showcasing this because it's really just giving you the idea of how images, I mean, if you just look at this, is it just a bridge or is it an entire circle? Things can appear differently in different ways. Now, on that note, let's consider the concept of the great planetariums. And we're looking at Adler Planetarium here, coincidentally located in Chicago, attributed to have been built in the 1930s, not too far from where they had that Columbian Exposition about 40 years earlier. Now, the interesting thing about a planetarium is you go inside a planetarium and you can have the entire sky projected accurately. Now, one of the arguing points that we have against the possibility of, how shall we say, different shapes of the land, aside from our sphere or our obloid or oblate spheroid or whatever we're calling it today, is that in a planetarium, you can actually replicate stars, the positions of constellations, and so on and so forth. And by the way, here's a question. If we're on a planet, can you really be anywhere where you can actually see all the stars? Or I should say a sphere. And the answer is no. So that's why if you go into a planetarium, it can be effectively replicated. In other words, it's an example of how the sky can be replicated. Is it representing something on a much larger level, or is it just a coincidence? That's something I leave to you. And what are you really seeing when you look at those great stars in the sky? Well, of course, as Carl Sagan told us, we're looking at suns. Now, granted, we've never actually been there, and we've never even sent any kind of probe there because, you know, our farthest out probes, Voyager, Pioneer, it's going to take them a long time to reach those nearby stars, tens of thousands of years or longer because they're not even on a course to them. Again, if you take space and everything, we're told about it at face value. But I always found planetariums very interesting for the kind of display that they could really put on. Because if you've ever gone and watched the old IMAX shows, and, you know, I remember when that was quite the fad with the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy, or Dark Knight trilogy, I should say, then you saw the film in a completely different aspect, a completely different element. Now, have we really changed anything with going to HD and 4K? The image is a lot more crisp. I can actually see where the hair is falling on a guy's face that I could never see before. I'm looking at this planetarium, and can I really see the way that, how shall we say, the stars may be spinning? Or is it really the way the stars are spinning? Or is it simply a representation of the way the stars are spinning? Really think about that with the concept of the planetarium. Yeah, there you go, I'm Kairos. Simulated scale models of the simulation. And what you're really saying there in that wonderful short statement there of all of 6 words is what may be projected to us. That's the possibility. Oh, sorry about that. What did I miss there? Hey, Kylo Ren's Rage. I'm living in a box. I'm living in a cardboard box. Yeah, maybe. Or some kind of dome. Thank you for that, by the way. Not perfect. No, whatever is perfect. So, hey, Julia, planes, trains, and automobiles. That's an interesting film, too. And so that's why it's important to question things, because we do have the planetarium concept. Now let's play a fun little game with images. Which table is larger? which table has more square area? Does anybody know? The table on the right or the table on the left? What do you think? Mm. I like to call this place an organic simulation. Yeah, it may well be. I think this Lucio is more powerful than we think. Yeah, that's possible. I feel like I'm back in gate. Oh, RB. No, 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 no. Not at all. Not at all. Ah, there you go. Yep, you're seeing it. Same. It's the same. Yes, it is exactly the same. But the point being is that it is a visual trick. And if you haven't come across this before, or if it's the first time seeing it, then a lot of people will say the table on the right. Or some people who have the length mentality will say the table on the left. Yes, they are exactly the same area. But it's just an example of a visual trick. Now, which one's larger, area A or area B? Is a projection a real? That's a good point there, Texas. And that's a good question as well. Trick question, trick question. Yes, am I asking another trick question here? So, yep, you got it. It's the same. And there's all kinds of little tests like this that you can do. But here's something I want you to think about. So when you're looking anywhere you may be, whether you're on a road or on a rail track, and we'll look at an image that shows it, you have the horizon and you have lines that you're looking down that all intersect at a point at infinity. Funny they use that terminology, a point at infinity. And so what's that really look like in a real image? Well, here I have this image here, and you can actually go stand out on the railway tracks and look with your real naked eyes, of course, when it's the light of day, and it may be the light of day wherever you are. And what do you see? Let me ask you, do the tracks actually get closer together? Do they really meet? Or are the tracks exactly the same length apart no matter how far you walk? And what am I getting at here? Is there a distortion? He says it very well. It's an optical illusion. That's exactly right. But it looks like the tracks meet in the horizon. All the terrain meets at the horizon. Oh, spherical geometry. Texas, did you read ahead in my mind or what? Yes, you know exactly what I'm getting at. Ah, Julia right there. Visual confluence. Absolutely. Vanishing point. Where's Kowalski? That's a good one. Yes. And so what we have here is we look at this and we know these tracks never meet, but to our eyes, it looks like they do. To our eyes, everything on the distant horizon comes together. Now, if you look at that famous painting of the Last Supper, we know exactly who is parked right at this point. Our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, in the painting of the Last Supper. And that's because all the lines direct towards that. It's a work of brilliance in terms of directing attention right there. Now, whatever your thoughts are on it, it's really interesting to think about three-dimensional perspective. Now, according to official history, artists learned about this because they would draw on glass. Prior to drawing on glass, they had no concept of this and couldn't replicate it in art. At least that's what they tell us. Here's another one of my favorite ones. Yes, the good old castle. And we've looked at this castle before, sitting on the fountain. Now, we know what's really going on. It's just simply perspective. And if you're a fan of the original Lord of the Rings films, yes, they used forced perspective a lot. It's a very effective visual trick. You know in your mind that the castle is not actually on the fountain, but it looks like the castle's on the fountain. And if you haven't had experience with these, you might think that this is a small castle. You may even think this is some kind of castle mailbox, maybe. Hey, can I get my castle mailbox and have it put out in front of my house? Yeah, there you go. Reminds me of Disneyland. Oh, thanks, Kathy. Appreciate that. I try to find some things that are somewhat cool, so. And Leo says it very well right here. It is very easy to visually trick. Absolutely. But if we think about this, remember that if we take our evolution theories at face value, which you know I do not, I question them vehemently, but you know, whatever you feel about them, we understand and we know that our eyes, since our eyes are in the front of our head, are our main sensory component. We rely on our eyes more than anything. Now, of course, you know, other people learn to rely on other senses and so on and so forth, but the vast majority of us rely on our eyes. And yet, with all this that we have so much of our brain power devoted to doing, we can be so easily tricked then does that mean that we can really trust everything that we see? And remember, you don't even need a full mile. You just need to get to the horizon. That's typically not even a full mile, depending where you are. You're absolutely right, Nana. Of course, if you ask Carl Sagan, he'll tell you it's a fact. He says it many times in Cosmos, but I agree. Realize, yes. But that's what I mean with seeing as reality or believing. Your eyes can be deceived. Your mind can be deceived, even though it's what we supposedly do better than anything else. Now, just a little bit of a reference here, back to the 1984 film 2010, and it still blows my mind to think that this film came out 41 years ago. And you may recall it's the sequel to 2001, where they went on a mission to Jupiter to recover the USS Discovery. What's fascinating to me, and what I'm just going to remind you of, is that this film was science fiction when it was released in 1984. Well, guess what? This is still just as much science fiction in 2025 as it was in 1984. We do not have any capability to put people in hypersleep in spaceships and send them to Jupiter. In fact, it's very difficult, apparently, for us to even send people to the moon. So it's just interesting. And no matter what your perspective on it is, whether you think space is real and everything they tell us about it is authentic, or you think it's completely a fantasy, much in the same way that the Terra Infinita maps are a fantasy, stated to be a fantasy. I mean, what's fantasy or what's real? Heck if I know, but I can tell you this is still science fiction. It was science fiction in 1984, it's science fiction now. That is an incontrovertible fact. No matter what your perspective is, that is a fact. Unless somebody knows about some secret mission going to Jupiter, and if you do, let me know. Yeah, good old John Lithgow. I only included this image because I remember how scared John Lithgow's character was to actually go out into the terror, the horror, the vacuum of space, conveying that void concept. And I'm just reminding everybody of that because is there a different kind of void? There's always that void that we're terrified of, but where does that void, that entropy really exist? Is it above us outside the atmosphere, or is it actually in between the spaces? Is it in between all those plots of land that we saw? By the way, did you know that John Lithgow almost played the Joker in the original Batman, the 1989 film? But then he didn't want to be involved in a comic book movie. Apparently, he later regretted it, although I never actually heard him say that. Now, on that note, I included this little image here from a friend's telescope that shows Jupiter and some of its moons. What an alignment there. Is there some kind of grand conjunction going on? Are we going to have another one of those lovely Highlander sequels? Yes, you know which Highlander movie I'm talking about, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I watched it. But yeah, you get some interesting things when you look through the telescope. I mean, are we really seeing a planet? Are we seeing a representation of a planet? Or are we seeing something else? You'd like to think that when you're looking through a telescope, you're actually looking at a real image. Now, I'm not going to tell you what conclusions to come to. I just find it very interesting, the things that you tend to see when you look through a telescope or a camera. And remember what we talked about earlier. Yeah, there you go. There can be only one, and there should have only been one, right? TV series was pretty good, but you can thank Adrian Paul for that. Again, just my opinion. Oh, what do we got here? Thanks, Mark One Walter. I appreciate that. I appreciate that very much. So it's just the concept of really looking and understanding. Thanks, Kyler Ren's Rage. I appreciate that as well. And welcome to the new member. Is seeing reality or is it believing? That's always the hard part behind it. Jupiter hardly know her. And so that's really what I want you to remember. Now, here's a little something else when we like to think that we're in control of our decisions. And this is for everybody who goes through their driver's license or their real ID that we're all required to have now to fly, at least in the United States. And it's talking about organ donation. Now, some forms have an opt-in where you have to check the box. You have to check the box to say, I want to opt in and volunteer to be an organ donor. And then you've got some forms where you have to opt out, check the box, and then you opt out. So what tends to happen? Well, I'll tell you what happens. We think that we make decisions, but a lot of people don't like to make decisions. And subconsciously, they'll avoid making decisions. So here's what happens. They don't check and they opt in, or they don't check and they opt out. Either way, people don't want to make a decision. They don't add anything on the form. And so then when you look at certain nations, guess which ones have the form where you actually have to opt in? And guess which ones have the form where you have to opt out. So, in other words, if you have to X a box to opt out, it's Austria, it's Belgium, it's France. And if you have to X a box to opt in, Germany, United Kingdom, Netherlands. Now, granted, this study has been questioned, of course, because if there's one thing we're not supposed to think about or believe or realize is that we try to avoid making decisions. Now, is there truth in that? Or is it just because, we're bored, we want to get out of the DMV as fast as possible? And it's the same whether you're in the United States, Europe, or anywhere in the land. Who wants to deal with bureaucracy? You just take the path of least resistance. Is that what this is actually saying? Now, there's a reason I'm bringing all this up, because thinking about the decisions that we have, something else I'll ask you to really think about. When you consider all of our entertainment nowadays, what do we have? We have a palette that's presented to us. We have something that really shows us what our decisions are supposed to be. We can't even see the whole color spectrum, apparently. Oh, very true, RB. Very, very true. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is, whatever your preferred streaming service is, and yes, I just picked Amazon, because it was easy enough to grab. How many of us even go through the trouble of typing in a film or a genre that we're looking into in the search bar? Or do we just pick whatever's presented to us? I'm going to watch Divergent. It's right up there. I'm going to watch Unforgotten. I mean, I have no idea what those films are actually about. No, I never watched the Divergent series. But because it's presented to us, and no, this is not my Amazon Prime, just so you know, I'm just going to watch it. And how many of us do that? No, we all do it all the time. It's easy. We want some entertainment. We want to turn our brains off and not think. But is it interesting that that seems to be a pattern that's being more and more encouraged in our civilization, wherever we are, that we just want to relax? Hey, I just want something recommended for me. Now, if any of y'all are wondering how I think on this, no, I am very, very selective with what I take for entertainment, but that's just me. I don't judge anybody, but I have definitive things I want to watch. And frankly, I would never in a million years pick any of these things. I'm sure they're all fine films and fine stories. The Imitation Game looks very interesting. Benedict Cumberbatch, I'm sure that's about Turing and the old Turing test and so on and so forth. So, Jacob, watching these gives us a frame of analysis. Absolutely. It sure does. So, Inferno. Just be cool if they would still make good stuff. Yeah, put a little bit more thought or effort into it. So, anyways. But that's really the question. Seeing is believing, and what is our reality, and how much do we not actually actively think about things? How much do we delegate or even forfeit self-agency because it's just easier? Because we don't want to go through the trouble of picking out something to even entertain us. And why would we? Anyways, so let's take a look at some connections, inspirations of the old world maps that may have inspired the maps of Terra Infinita. Because guess what? There's actually older maps that look relatively similar. And some of these you'll recognize, and some of them we haven't looked at before. Now, the first one I'm going to pull up, you'll probably recognize it, and we'll look at the overall image of it. But we got a little pie slice here. Let me make sure you can see this. And you may recall this is from the Urbano Monte world map, or planisphere as they call it. So, And what's interesting to me about this is that this was a map that was relatively recently discovered, and yet it showed some very accurate depictions of the distant past, what the world looked like in 1587. And yes, we've got a good story behind it. This map was found in a toilet, because where else would it be found? I hide things in my toilet all the time. Don't go looking in my toilet. You're going to find all the secrets of all the books written in strange languages that I hid. I hid them all in my toilet, because it makes sense, right? Gee, where's St. Petersburg? I don't see it. But anyways. And then some of the other ones, the original old quote-unquote flat earth map with some other concepts behind it. So you might see some overlaps with what's depicted in the Terra Infinita maps. And this is very intriguing that this idea has been around before. Now, of course, you'll be informed that this is absolutely wrong, and people will come out of the way to attack you for even trying to think of something like this. Now, what's interesting to me is, why are you even saying at this point that the land is flat, it's a disc, or it's a sphere? I mean, it could be something else entirely. It might be infinite flat lands as far as the eye can see. It might even be a much larger sphere, far larger than we can even begin to imagine, that we couldn't even see the curvature because it's so large. All possibilities are on the table. But you may recall, and you got these different names, Sol, Bol, the different suns, Set, Anubis, different names for the bodies. Is that alluding to something with orbs that we see in the sky? I don't know. But then there's also the other older world maps that are very, very intriguing. And of course, they were always displayed on flat maps that you could just pull out on your chart because, nobody was going to take a globe with them when they were sailing the seas, were they? And that was compensated for by the way that they plotted the longitude and latitude lines. Now, you may recall our little study of loxodrome and how that operates in the past, and the Portuguese mathematician that was behind that. And that's how you display, or how you explain, I should say, the discrepancies between actual latitude and longitude with plotting the course of a ship. We won't go over that again. We're just looking at some of the maps. But then there's also older maps that give us this idea of this concentric ring theory, and we'll call it that, or this concentric ring idea that's very prominent in the realms or the lands of Terra Infinita. And so it's very intriguing that there is a lot of definitive actual history that does back this up, and also backs up other intellectual properties that we see. Legendary. Why hasn't some millionaire sailed around Antarctica to see if there's any passage through, or has one? Well, you can look up what the treaty says about anybody who goes south of the 60th parallel, 60 degrees south. It's, how shall we say, controlled access. And let's be honest, how much power do millionaires truly have, or billionaires? And that's a rhetorical question. Maybe you think they have a lot. I don't think they do, but maybe they think they do. Elusive Truths, good to see you. The many worlds interpretation is a way of understanding quantum mechanics that proposes that all possible quantum outcomes are physically realized in different separate universes. And I think there is a lot to that theory. And I've actually always been I think there's a lot of evidence that does actually back up that theory. And there's also a lot of anecdotal evidence that backs up that theory. So, hey, AC Topo, concentric is most intriguing. Geodes, hollow rocks. And it's something that we do see reflected in many different places at many different times. You're absolutely right. So, not like the 13 trillionaire families. Well, again, do they have power, or are they just taking orders? I guess that's up to you to decide. So, anyways, on to some other world maps here. And you'll see some very interesting ones that aren't laid out in the exact way that we'd expect them to be laid out. Yes, that actually happened. And one of the courses I used to teach back before I was exiled from the university and told not to ever come back was on Mappamundi, or all the different maps of the Middle Ages. It's always interesting to me that even before the so-called Age of Exploration, during the Middle Ages, or the medieval times, the Dark Ages, whatever we're calling them today, because that name changes a lot, we had many different types of depictions, many different types of maps. There were so many different types of maps that there was an entire field of study called Mappamundi. It's still around, and I've explored it in the past. And it tries to explain why you have these older maps that have a different layout. You might notice that there's something odd about this. If you look at the layout of this map, oh, look, Hibernia. Oh, interesting. We're actually situated north, but we're looking south. And how many maps are really like that? Because you see you have Europe, Europa, Libya, supposed to be Africa, down here to India. I mean, how does this even make sense? Albania is way over here. I mean, is it laid out completely different? There's actually a lot of maps that are that way. Ah, yes, and I've been waiting for this. So now we go back to our famous individual, Eratosthenes. And Eratosthenes was a big hero of Carl Sagan. He did a whole segment about him in Cosmos. And you notice that he has the interesting appearance. He kind of looks like one of those Telosians from classic Star Trek, with some facial hair and a little bit of hair on the back of his head. But anyway, Eratosthenes, if you don't recall, is famous, known for calculating the circumference of the Earth, going off the concept that the Earth is a globe or a sphere or an obloid spheroid or whatever name we're calling it. And he was very, very close with his calculation. And remember Carl Sagan very confidently saying, that's right. But here's what's interesting. In the 1800s, well, there's two interesting details about this. They reconstructed a world map that Eratosthenes drew, apparently, in the 1800s, because you may recall that all the research of Eratosthenes was lost when the library in Alexandria went up in smoke. So, how exactly did anybody know about this calculation of the circumference of the planet? How could anybody have assembled this map? And you notice that this is a two-dimensional map and it only shows the three continents, Europe, Africa, called Libya here, and Asia. And yet it doesn't say, by the way, there's more land over here, there's more land over here. Or, it's not actually a ball of some sort. Or it doesn't say it's not in some sort of Robinson projection or one of the map projections. It's all very peculiar. And of course, the 1800s when we just rediscovered everything, even though, again, all of his research went up in smoke. It's just very, very interesting. Now, you may recall one of these older flat Earth maps, and this is very, very controversial, so I'm just going to keep this in mind. This is difficult to corroborate, but apparently there were images that showed maps such as this, where you had the concentric theory going out, and it showed many unidentified lands that surrounded the quote-unquote known continents. Are there 6 or 7 known continents? I'm not sure. Is the 7th one a myth, or does Antarctica really exist? It's up to you to decide. Yes, I have been there, and it is kind of a boring place, but there's some interesting mystery to it. And I'll be honest with you, I wish I never went there because I would prefer to have a little bit more of an open mind, because the things I saw there kind of closed my mind in some ways. And no, I'm not even talking about our theories. And no, I did not navigate my way there, so I have no idea what path we actually took. I just remember the flight seemed like it took forever, but that was a long time ago. Now, there's other maps that show interesting representations and do give this concentric land mentality that we see in the Terra Infinita maps. So, he looks less like Popeye. The UN map must be truth hidden in plain sight. Well, and who exactly knows what the UN map, but that's an interesting example. So, well, who knows? Is the Earth a globe? Is it something else entirely? I mean, even if you went to a place where you could see the land, the point I was getting at earlier, would you be seeing it accurately? Or would it be some kind of visual distortion? That's the question I'm always about asking. Tabor here with a good one. If I'm laying on the equator, am I actually right side up? Well, one of the ways that we try to talk about that, you can reference that other Simpsons episode where Bart had to go to Australia and apologize for doing a collect call to figure out which way the water flowed when you flushed the toilet. Was it going clockwise or counterclockwise? Yeah. Oh, Kathy, the Earth is a snow globe. Yeah, or it's a gigantic planetarium, right? Oh, goodness me. So anyways, but these are all original maps. And by the way, here's a really unique one, and I've never shown this one before. The new correct map of the flat surface stationary Earth. And you see who's exactly responsible for this. John Abizade. Hey, wasn't he? Never mind, I'm not going to go there. Boston, Massachusetts. Now, what's really interesting about this, and again, you see this is actually concentric, down here. This is actually in the Library of Congress. It was added to the Library of Congress December 8th. I'm going to assume that's 1920, although who knows with the Library of Congress. You'd think they'd put the full year on it, but whatever, they know. They're very well organized. But very, very intriguing that it shows this and it says this. I mean, is this just to document that there were those crazy people who actually thought that the land was all flat? Is that why they added this to the Library of Congress? What's the historical significance behind this? And no, I did not deep dive this intentionally because we're just looking at the maps that may have inspired the Terra Infinita maps. Now, this is the more well-known and very, very incorrect map. And, if you show this to anybody, they're going to tell you it's incorrect. Although what's always interesting to me is that it sort of showed that whole crater concept. Now, am I a believer in crater, or do I think it's a dome or something else? I'm not really sure. I do know that if there was that kind of change in terrain over that sort of distance, I'd like to think it would be more visible, but maybe it's just not something we can perceive. Because whether you think it's flat, whether you think it's a crater or whatever, it is safe to say that what we do not perceive is the change in that surface. And the explanation for it being is that you're covering such a vast distance, you can't perceive the change in the surface. In other words, is it curving? I can't perceive it because it's so big. I'm supposed to be able to see it on the horizon, but you can look at all the experiments in that, and whatever you decide to believe, that's completely on you. But it's just one of those interesting things that you might not be seeing what reality actually is. And maybe we really cannot see what reality is. That's what I'm getting at here. Ah, there you go, Kathy. There's your little snow globe. Maybe I'll send those out. Maybe you can get one of these concentric models, and it can actually show you what the lands really look like. Maybe that's reality because that actually accounts for what we can experience. Because we know the land is not flat, it's not two-dimensional. You could describe it as a plane, and it exists in some sort of planetarium, and that's why we actually have a three-dimensional existence. In other words, you can go forward, back, left, right, and up, down. Now, how far down you can go? Well, it depends how far you can go into the ground. What's the deepest borehole? Is that really the deepest we've been in the ground, or have we been deeper? I don't know. And then you do look at some of the old Mappamundi, the actual Middle Ages maps, and what they show you, showing you fantastic creatures, but not just fantastic creatures, which of course everyone will dismiss as, oh, it was just the crazy imagination of those wild Middle Ages people who were just afraid of everything. And don't forget, these were the same people that managed to build the incredible Florence Cathedral and also pull all other kinds of interesting things out of their fourth points of contact and build them. Granted, it took them hundreds of years. And many people in the comments properly identify what that really means. But it's intriguing when you look at this and you get an idea of all these possibilities, because suddenly you get the idea of where that inspiration really came from. That what we're seeing in the Terra Infinita maps are what we've already seen in the actual old world maps of the Mappamundi. The extreme conditions of unique environments, unique creatures, flora and fauna, beyond our wildest imagination. Is that the devil? I don't know, Win. Maybe, maybe not. Depends who the devil is. And Vaughn says it very well right there. Two-dimensional is so much easier. It is. It's easier to grasp and to see and to conceptualize, even if we're going off of something else. Kathy, I believe dragons are real before believing a dinosaur is real. Well, maybe they're one and the same, Kathy. Who knows? Maybe that's just our catch-all to say that, it's a dinosaur. It's actually a dragon. It's kind of the same thing. uh, and then you'll have some interesting maps like this. And again, this is also from our friends in Library of Congress. Oh, look, they put the full year on it. How nice of them. November 9th, 1905, the map division. And here, looking at what's supposed to just be the hemisphere, although we're missing a lot of Africa here. We don't really have much of Asia shown on it. Oh, look, Hyperborea, ocean Hyperborea. What's really going on up there? That Arctic region is just as interesting as that Antarctic region, whatever the heck you think is actually going on there. But again, another one of these interesting maps. And then, of course, looking at the full planisphere, the Urbano Monte map, which, remember, they found this in sections and they had to reassemble this whole thing. So not only did they find it in a toilet, but then they had to reassemble it after finding it in a toilet. A map of 1587, from 1587. Just amazing. Like I said, I got all those crazy books with gold paper and funky languages hidden in my toilet because that makes sense, doesn't it? I'm kidding. I'm being facetious, but But there was also other older world maps. I mean, imagine, look at the size of that castle. I mean, you would think obviously not to scale, right? But it does make you wonder, why is that one so large and so detailed? Because it's the mightiest, most beautiful castle in the world, and we're going to put it on this world map, I guess. Or maybe it's just some sort of symbol or placeholder. Not sure. Dragons on the other side of the ice wall. Oh, yes, Kathy, maybe many, many other things. Is it an ice wall? Is it another kind of barrier? That's what we don't know. David, line of sight comms at 800 miles. Funny you mentioned that. I'm glad you brought that up. You reminded me of something. I remember monitoring communications from the Middle East when I was actually in North America. Now, granted, I don't know the nuances behind that. I just remember that our signal officer had taken care of it. But I do very distinctly remember that. And this was with wireless communication. Very, very interesting. So, Tartarian, according to AI, there was never a Hyperborea on the map. Poor AI is a tool of deception already. Yeah, well, I can find plenty of Mappamundi, and you can find virtually many references that, yes, it was on maps, and it was drawn on maps, and we've seen several, but yeah. But there's a reason why I always tell you, maybe you should just keep doing your own thinking and not let a program do it for you. RB, Ellie's former life as a spy. No. Just a very bored analyst, RB. That's probably the closest it would be. But I appreciate the vote of confidence. So Ooh, good call out there. Devil's Tower is awesome. It is, and I strongly advise visiting it if you're ever in the Wyoming area. My bailiwick zone, John Wayne toilet paper. It's rough and tough and doesn't take off nobody. Come on, my bailiwick zone. It could not be more humid where you are than where I am, but whatever. And now we've seen this kind of map before. Ooh, look, Orbis. What does Orbis mean? It does not mean globe. It means circle, for Pete's sake, but that's okay. We'll go over that again. And then we have Terra Australis Incognita. You remember how Captain Cook went down there but couldn't actually find Antarctica. But somehow he did confirm that there wasn't this big continent down there. So I guess he didn't see the sign on the continent that said Antarctica. He missed it. I mean, that whole story about how Captain Cook missed a continent is quite intriguing. Of course, that was before he went bonkers when he tried going through the Bering Strait. And then he went to Hawaii and got bonked on the head, so the story goes. So, yes. That's the story that we have with the connections and the inspiration behind the old world maps. So, make of it what you will. Oh, what's this here? I missed this. Tabor, is the map expanding? The garden in the beginning, then a continent, then the new world was found. Now we are expanding again, Mars. Very, very possible. And a very interesting experiment that you've got there in ideology. Very, very intriguing. So let's go on beyond the connections and let's consider the concept of lands beyond other lands, because it's always very, very interesting. What are we really getting at when we talk about these lands beyond? What's it really look like? Well, you know, we just can't let go of the concept of domes. And by the way, domes appear in many different ways. For example, we've got cool golden domes for America, our missile protection domes. Yes, I mean, why don't we just build a giant dome over the United States if we want to protect it? Wouldn't that be easier, you know? I mean, you'd think we'd be able to do that. This is the United States, after all. Don't tell me it's prohibitively expensive. Think of all the jobs that there would be in that. Now, facetiousness aside, it is interesting, though, that we reference domes so much. They come up a lot. And you actually see it on some of these old maps, the concept of the firmament. Very, very interesting. Mountains, earth, and what's down here? Hades. Doesn't sound very happy. I remember when Mr. Burns said, blast his hide to Hades. So the concept of a firmament, again, relating back to that concept that we had of the planetarium. Coincidence? Not really sure. But again, it does appear on many of these images, and it comes up quite often. How dome could one be? Geez, yes. Domes here, domes there, here a dome, there a dome. Yeah, I know, I'm just being facetious about the joking, but you do see domes in science fiction and quite a bit. And whether we're talking about Epcot Center in Disney World or wherever, they come up. Let's not forget Logan's Run, one of my favorite science fiction films from the 1970s, the great dome city that survived the cataclysm. Now, just imagine if those lands that are depicted in Terra Infinita are gigantic domes. Now, are they natural domes or are they domes of some other sort of material? You know how they like to talk about dark matter and dark energy in space, although nobody has any idea what the heck it really means. Yeah, the actual scientific concepts. I mean, they try to explain it. Basically, it's a way of explaining that which we cannot explain. Or if you're a fan of Star Trek, we call it technobabble. Of course, there wasn't much technobabble in the original Star Trek, but the less said about that, the better right now. But then there's also the geodesic domes and many different scales. Now, you may recall that picture we looked at. No, I didn't bother fishing it up, where they talked about building a gigantic dome over New York City. And you may recall in that old image of the great city of Bologna with the towers in Italy, they showed what looked to be a dome over it. Is that some kind of defensive dome? Did it have another possibility? And then this other idea. What if these lands are actually in craters? Now, it used to be easier to find images that would show, you know, entire worlds, if you will, in a crater, but for some reason that's become difficult now. I can't imagine why. Or maybe I just wasn't up to the task of finding it and, you know, I was just being lazy. And if you want to say I was, that's fine. Or maybe I'm just playing it safe and just actually showing a regular crater just to communicate the idea. But this concept that maybe each of these lands in Terra Infinita, remember, it's just a fantasy, it's fiction, is actually in a giant crater. And then you have the mountains or the ocean around it. And then what's in the crater is the lands. And then what kind of land do you have to cross to actually get to the next crater or the next world, if you will? Is it an inhospitable land? Is it a desert like this? Is it something else entirely? Is it all lava? Do we need to take our airship? Do we have underground transportation? That which we don't know. And what would we come across crossing these lands? Do we see ruins of other great civilizations that once stood? I always found it funny in Logan's Run how all the buildings that survived were old world buildings, including the U.S. Capitol. That I guess they built the dome during the Civil War because there wasn't anything else going on during that time, right? Oh, goodness. And, that whole concept of the carousel scene, which, by the way, was not in the novel of Logan's Run, but somehow it got in the film. And I'm just referring to this because the whole concept of people dying at a very young age, if you remember the premise behind Logan's Run, everybody dies when they're 30, or you try to run and get outside the dome. And they get blasted on this machine called the carousel, thinking they're going to renew. Until Michael York finds out, you mean no one's ever renewed? The question has been answered, Logan 5. Do I get my 4 years back? No answer. Now, there's this other premise, and, whether you're talking about Hindu mythology or actual religious belief, however you want to say it, the concept of the earth being on elephants and a turtle. It also appears in the Discworld realm. And I don't think Jamie's on right now, but that's all right. And, it's one of my favorite stories to read about. So... lots of clues about the water above. Oh, yes, you're talking about looking at the sky. What a coincidence that is. Some say that we live in the eye of a blue-eyed giant named Macumber. Before that character took a nosedive. So, yeah, I know. I miss Terry too. Kylo's Ren Rage. Wonderful, wonderful creative mind there. Or maybe he was talking about something. And could you actually see something that's just completely out of the realm of possibilities? Lands that are just floating, disembodied lands? Or are you actually looking at portals, skyways to other things? And I do like this representation because it really gives you that idea, that mentality of what it may be. Or could it exist in some other sort of fashion? Is it a giant sort of plate that we're on, a giant disc, but then it's surrounded by something else? I mean, the reality that we have could be very, very strange. Or, maybe we are just flying around on a giant turtle and elephants. And, you can either go rimward or hubward, going back to Discworld. It does match a lot of these concepts. And who knows what kind of creatures, we talked about dragons, giants, or even other terrifying creatures that you might encounter if you were able to cross the lands that do hypothetically exist between these worlds that are marked in the Terra Infinita series. So anyway, let's take a look at methods of accessing these other lands. How could we actually access these lands? Well, we've talked about it in quite a bit of detail, but just thought we'd cover it real quick here. What do we really have? Well, I think, with mentioning portals, I think that's some of the brilliance, whether Claudio made this up or he was divinely inspired or who knows. Like I said, I don't know the individual, but seems like he's a creative mind. And like I said, I haven't watched the YouTube channel, but certainly recommend it because these ideas are amazing. Do you access other lands with portals? Is it some kind of machine that's connected together? Is there some other means that we can access the other lands that we just don't fully understand yet? Why do we have this incredible cathedral in Florence, Italy that defies all convention? And you may remember the interior of it. Why do we have these ideas in science fiction franchises of these guardians, these portals that exist in these ruined civilizations? And of course, I'm showing a screenshot from City on the Edge of Forever. What an episode. And if you haven't watched classic Star Trek, I definitely recommend it just because of what happened. I mean, everything is brought out in that. The whole possibilities of existence, all in about 50 minutes of television. They also brought the idea back in The Next Generation when they found out about the Iconians. Yes, the episode where the Enterprise was malfunctioning. And they found there was a civilization that developed portals and gateways. There's also the idea that these capitals that we have are actually part of a giant world machine, a different kind of apparatus that would enable the projection of these portals that anybody could access anywhere. And so suddenly, travel across these vast distances that we don't even fathom or understand becomes practical. And then, of course, my old idea that maybe our entire reality is actually four-dimensional. It's a hypercube or a hypersphere. In other words, things are constantly shifting. That's how you explain why you have four lands in the Arctic at one point in time, but then you have nothing but a frozen ocean there at another point in time. And maybe that's why there are elements, there are actually visual cues of evidence of both a spherical land, a flat land, and everything in between. Again, it's just an idea. I'm thinking outside the box, literally. And then, of course, looking on the inside of Florence Cathedral with all the portals that you have. Maybe it is an apparatus itself. Maybe the existence of everything is actually like this, where it is possible to access completely different lands and worlds just by a machine or technology that's been lost over time. So, uh, yes, we live in a tesseract. Well, and I've always wondered that, Michael. I think maybe we do. RB, my ADHD prays for that kind of travel. Well, it's the spirit of adventure in all of us. And I think, once again, that's why the Terra Infinita maps speak to us so directly, RB. So, the last idea I'll look at here in this exploration, is it possible that there were humans or the concepts of Tartaria that came from a completely different land? And so when you go back and you look at this original Terra Infinita map, and like I said, Claudio's improved it. You can definitely look at that at your leisure. But you see all these different lands that are so intriguing and all these possibilities. And, are they physically connected? Are they not? You could spend all day looking at this and coming up with all these ideas and all these possibilities for all these lands. And it's on a single sheet of paper. All these different waterways, all these different portals, and all these possibilities of existence. But I'll leave you with this. Is it possible that all these explorations that we've done, this entire civilization of Tartaria, the humans that come from it, that they actually came from these lands that are elsewhere? That somehow, some way, the very origin of what may be the most balanced civilization we actually ever had in our land came from somewhere else. The people, the civilization came from lands beyond. Because I was doing a podcast yesterday, and one of the points that we talked about is, how did you get these people who could build these things? How do you have these accounts of the historical Lucius Aurelian, the Roman emperor from the crisis of the 3rd century, that don't make any sense? A guy who was just completely incorruptible and was somehow able to bring together a shattered empire, unless it's telling a different story. Where do these accounts of these others come from? These giants, these creatures? Do they actually exist in these other lands? And you see how Terra Infinita actually ties us all together. Even the concept of the ant people, whether they were saviors or tormentors, the ant people possibly coming from other lands themselves. There are no limitations on these possibilities. The lands beyond being the origin of this great civilization. And maybe it even goes back further in the eras. Maybe the contact occurred much further in the past than we can begin to imagine. And that's how we have these incredible influences that have endured to this day. It's really, really hard to say. But I think that's where we can really leave the concept of Terra Infinita. Anyways, Michael says it well here. Just close your eyes and click your heels 3 times and think of home. Yeah, wouldn't it be something if it was that simple? And maybe that's why we have that concept. Maybe that's why we really see that, because that is the connection. So, and again, it's trying to explain all these things that we see, but we can't necessarily reconcile with any account, whether it's the official historical account or even the theories that we have in alternative research. So, Kathy says it well here. I do think we're getting close to many of the answers of our day, and that's why we keep searching and why we keep going. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this exploration. I know this was a special Wednesday exploration, and I appreciate everyone joining me. And if there is a demand for it, I will definitely be delighted to take a look at other unique maps from other explorers if there is a demand for it. So by all means, let me know. Let me know. Tabor, after I die, I'm going to come back and let people know what happens. Yeah, I hope, I wish we can maintain the consciousness to do that. So, anyways, I appreciate it. I appreciate it all. And I'm glad you enjoyed it. So, join us this Saturday. We're going to come back on Saturday for another live stream, and I'll preview the live stream this time. And for this one, we're actually going to take a look at something very, very interesting that I haven't really talked about before. And for live stream this Saturday, we're going to discuss the very interesting cover-up of the 20th century. And we're going to talk about every single cover-up of the 20th century. And don't worry, we're going to talk about the most interesting cover-up of the 20th century, and that is covering up a civilization. So anyway, please join us then this Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And before you depart, if you haven't already done so, please hit the like button. I appreciate everyone being here and supporting the channel. And this has been a wonderful and enjoyable explanation from my perspective. Hopefully you enjoyed it as well. So again, thank you for joining us, and please hit that like button before you go, and be sure to join us on Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, for the great cover-up of the 20th century, or the 1900s, however you want to say it. Well, thank you very much, and this is Lucius Aurelian, signing off.